of something that I had started for my PhD, and which really well, Adrian, which came out as a book, Hindustani Music in Colonial Bombay. And the selection of that topic itself was driven by my personal experience itself. I was at a point where my career was just starting as a performer. I mean, I started performing as a child artist, but really speaking as a professional was before the 90s. So let's say around 1985, 86. And around that time was when I had completed my master's. I was very interested in history. Of course, at that time, we were taught political history, cultural history. But I was trying to locate myself in this ecosystem that I was seeing around me, the Hindustani music ecosystem. And of course, I was facing challenges of all kinds, artistic as well as professional challenges. And I started asking myself whether I was the only one, first of all, facing such challenges, or were there others? And was it a fact that this was happening only now? Or what about musicians who came 100 years ago to this city where I reside, Bombay or Mumbai? As you know, that a lot of musicians came from central and northern India to Bombay and to Calcutta or Kolkata after 1857. And this is part of documented history. So what were their lives like in these cities, colonial cities, where patronage was not easy to come by? So that set me thinking, and I decided to work on that aspect about colonial Bombay, Hindustani music and musicians in colonial Bombay. After I had completed that and I brought it to 1947, I thought, how about doing a kind of a sequel, looking at what has transpired in the Republic post 1947 up until now? Because I was also seeing my students who have been learning from me for the past few decades and continue to, they are facing several problems in this rapidly changing world. And so I was trying to see whether I could find some answers to their questions, my questions. And so I decided to look at the ecosystem as it exists today, starting, of course, from a slightly historical overview from 1947, and then bringing it up to speed to today. That's how I decided to write this book.
Excellent. And so you mentioned that you face some challenges in the early stage of your career. I'm wondering, will you be able to share what those challenges were and how they affected you?
Sure. So, well, when I started learning music, it was not with the idea of performing. I just did it because I love music, and my parents felt that, okay, there was some sort of talent there, so I should study in an organized manner. So I started at the age of 6. So there was no question of thinking about performance opportunities. And fortunately for me, I never thought about performance opportunities, because if I had, I wouldn't really have been able to continue my career as a musician, because as you know, Hindustani music doesn't have a large scheme of patronage, a very organized system of patronage. So concert opportunities are difficult to come by. When I started, this was a time when music circles were up and about. I wouldn't say they were flourishing in terms of funds, but yes, every important suburb and even in the CBD, you had some music circles. So you had those kind of concert opportunities. They were not big festivals. There were a few big festivals that occurred in during the winter, but by and large through the year, it was these music circles which were kind of helping sustain the lives of musicians, both artistically and professionally. Apart from that, you had radio and television, more radio than television. Television was a little later. And even on television, classical music was not as widely publicized as would be the case on Akashvani or All India Radio. All India Radio had every day you had music going on. Each artist would have around 2 to 3 broadcasts once every 2 months or 3 months, depending on the grade that you had after the audition that you had appeared for. So broadcasting was one area that you could get some opportunity, concert and some fee as well. And teaching, both private instruction as well as if you were engaged in a music school or a music department in a university. So these areas were there for a musician. And yet, we are not really the original custodians of this music. It's the hereditary musicians who have been the original custodians, and we need to acknowledge that. I'm a first generation musician in my family. So when I came to this field, there were a host of others like me. And so there were always limited concert opportunities. Having said that, I must say I was very fortunate. I was performing quite a few times. Fortunately for me, I have my old diaries, so I can actually, put down how many dates I had. And as things stand, I've up until now, I've accompanied around 250 artists, vocalists, instrumentalists, dancers. And so I've had the good fortune to enrich myself musically because of this. But I have to say that that was not the case for the large majority of musicians. So this was a major problem for most musicians, the lack of many concert opportunities. And even if there were concert opportunities, even for myself, the fee that was paid was really abysmal. Really, really abysmal. When you were a young artist, you were paid abysmal fees, and when you became a senior artist, that continued. And unfortunately, that continues to this date as well. So this was another problem, that A, you didn't have concert opportunities to sustain yourself artistically. Even if the opportunities came by, you didn't have a great fee as compared to any other profession, which if let's say if you're in medicine or engineering or whatever. So then why would parents encourage students, their children, to take to music, and support them when they are taking it as a profession? Because there's no light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So these were the kind of problems. Also, the the changing pace of everything, it was really rapidly changing. 100 years ago, it was quite different. I'm sure musicians then would think that things were changing rapidly too,
Mm-hmm.
with transport, communication, etc., etc. But I was living in a time when the internet was just beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and then the liberalization in the economy also took place. So several changes, new record labels came into existence. Mm, Uh, of course, those brought opportunities to people. At the same time, there were some problems associated with that too, and we can go into the details there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So these were some of the personal experiences that I had while growing up as a performer.
It's very interesting, Anish. Thanks for sharing that. And I guess what I'd like to do is just maybe go back one generation and then go forward one generation to see
Yes,
what those challenges were. So, say with your Guruji, with Nikhil Ghosh and that generation, what
yes.
sort of challenges they might have faced, and
Mm,
then zoom forward to see, for your students, what sort of challenges do you think they might face? And then we get
yes,
an idea over three generations how things have changed so quickly.
absolutely, absolutely. So in the case of my Guruji's generation, so my Guruji was not from Bombay. Uh, so he belongs to Bengal, actually East Bengal, originally. So many of the musicians who were in Bombay around that time came from outside, whether it was Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma or Pandit Hari Prasad Chaurasia or whoever, they all came from outside. So migration must have been the first challenge for them.
Mm,
Uh, I mean, it's really your living space has changed,
mm,
uh, and you have to work around that,
mm,
and find some mode of sustenance in
mm,
this new geographical space.
mm,
Uh, so that must have been the first challenge. Secondly, I think the fact that they were in a time where individual instruction through the Guru Shishya Parampara had already transformed. I mean, that continued for those who wanted to take it as a profession, and then that continues to this date as well. The mentor-mentee kind of relation,
yeah.
but uh, there were also music schools. So there was an institutionalized form of music education. So I think they had to deal with that as well,
Mm-hmm.
and so review their own teaching practice,
Mm-hmm.
or if they were learning here, whether how they were going to negotiate this terrain as well. Uh, this would have been a major problem then as well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I know even a generation before them, like for instance, Ustad Vilayat Hussain Khan Sahab of the Agra Gharana, Ustad Khadim Hussain Khan Sahab, Agra Gharana. Their forefathers had also come in the 19th century to Bombay. And by the early 20th century, they were doing what we call tuition
Mm-hmm.
now, private tuition. So they were paid, let's say, 25 rupees a month or 40 rupees a month. The tabla player used to be paid something like 10 rupees a month, to sit in and accompany the teaching session. So they had already navigated through the what they had been trained in, the Guru Shishya Parampara. First of all, they were hereditary musicians. Now they had to share their music with people who are outside their families.
Exactly. And they left their
Uh,
families. They left their
absolutely,
belongings.
absolutely, and the reason was obviously because the need for sustenance,
Mm,
and so they had to make these kind of come up with these adaptive strategies um,
mm,
in this new environment.
mm,
So So you had those people already doing that. You had the next generation also slowly taking to that. And then you come to me, where I'm already in this space where I'm surrounded. I mean, I started in an institutionalized format. I started in a music school set up by my guru. And it was only after a few years that he said, okay, you can learn from me directly as a shishya. And then I went through all the rituals, etc., which are very much part of that tradition. Uh, so for me, and I belong to a family which is, you know, my parents were educated, they were professionals. My mother was a lawyer, my father, a journalist, author, etc., etc. Very liberal, very left of center. And so, and I was in this other space, which for me seemed very feudal in many, many ways. And I was always in this, there was always this dilemma. How am I to negotiate this? So this was, of course, a personal experience for me, and a challenge, a different kind of challenge for me. Other than what other musicians perhaps of my age had to face. And then we come to my students or their contemporaries. We live in an age where teaching is taking place on Skype and various other platforms. The student can access information about this music at the strike of a button. You can access a multitude of gharana styles, compositions, rags, tals, etc. And so that, of course, opens up a lot of doors, but it also brings a sense of entitlement to the student, where you feel that it's so easily available. It's so easily available that you conflate information and knowledge and wisdom.
Good point.
Yeah. So you don't realize that what you're dealing with is information, and too much of information at a time when you perhaps are not ready for it. And even if it does ignite curiosity, in the traditional format, because you were an observer at most times, as a curious individual, you were not really allowed to ask too many questions, or you were told, okay, I'll tell you the answer to that later on. Okay. So now you are in a time when the curious can actually pose questions to you, can give you a comparative kind of view that, okay, you're saying this, but I heard this elsewhere. And I like that. I like that change, but most others may not like that change. And they find it difficult to navigate. The gurus, I mean, the teachers. And also, I think there has to be empathy in the teaching process from both sides. The teacher and the taught need to have a sense of empathy. Otherwise, you can't really go ahead. If either of them have these inflated egos, sometimes you're faced with students who I'm not, fortunately, and maybe because I'm not too democratic in the teaching space. But you come up with students who feel scared um, there is a fear of making mistakes even in the presence of the teacher. And I think that fear is actually because of the ego. When you are studying any discipline, I think you have to keep your ego outside the door,
Mm,
and only then can you go ahead.
mm,
Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So you get angry with yourself
mm,
when you're learning, and you say, oh, why am I making this mistake, and how can I make this mistake,
mm,
forgetting at that time that you are actually a student. So
mm,
you're bound to make a mistake. That's part of the learning process, and that in fact is the pleasure of learning.
mm.
So when you fall, you slip, and then you rise again, and you learn through that. So I think that has changed a bit also because of this access to information.
Mm, mm, mm.
Because you feel that, you know, you know it all, So what's the problem, Why can't you do it?
Which is a fantastic segue into the next thing. You were associated as a music consultant and a creative advisor for a film called The Disciple,
Yes.
and which I think has been given the epitaph in one review as a triumphant tale of artistic failure. And this is, I guess, bringing those three generations where you're saying that this information is available for modern students, but then there's this specter of the past, these voices from the past talking about this sort of really, very pure and very almost unattainable um, goals and feats of accomplishment. So I was wondering, you mentioned this. Can you talk a little bit about that disciple and the journey that within the disciple and how realistic that is, or how much that is relevant to today as well?
Sure, sure. It's very interesting that work on that film uh, was happening when I was writing Chasing the Round Dream,
Mm-hmm.
or just after that, actually. and and the issues that the mm, I mean, it's a work of fiction, of course, but the issues that you see come up in the film are issues that I have discussed in my book as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, those, and of course others as well. But yeah, and this film has been made by Chaitanya Tamane. He's an amazing uh, young director,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, he wasn't connected with the Hindustani music world, but he studied it so closely, and even studied the repertoire. So he really immersed himself in this project, and I mean, our association started, of course, with in an interview. He was interviewing several people across the field, teachers, students, performers, etc., etc. And he was traveling through the country for that. And one of the interviews he did was an extensive one with me, and we kept in touch. And then suddenly, when his script was ready, he said he'd like to read it out to me. So I said, sure. So we met, and then he said, would you consider coming on board? Uh, and then I said, sure. And then, of course, it has traditional music, so there's no original composition of mine.
Mm-hmm.
So then we couldn't give myself the credit for music direction or composition. So I decided I should call myself music designer,
Oh.
and yeah, and I was also a consultant for the research and the music. So that's how that was my association with Disciple. And after its release, and it's on Netflix if any of you want to watch it. It's a Marathi film, but it has subtitles, so you can
It's
watch
2020,
it.
wasn't it? It came out in
Yes, that's right.
yes, I've heard of
Yes,
it. Yeah.
yes. During the pandemic. So, yeah. So, fortunately, we have these OTT platforms. So, uh, yeah, so that has met with a lot of success, of course, in terms of awards, and also recognition from and accolades from the audiences. But people in the Hindustani music world, uh, many of them have not uh, been able to accept the reality that they are faced with through that film. And so, I mean, I've received some calls from people. Oh, why did he have to show all that? You know? So, and if that was the case, I mean, once having seen all this reality, will parents ever send their children to learn Hindustani music and all these arguments were put forth. Uh, but it's a great film, so watch it.
It is. And the thing that particularly strikes me, I wonder if you could, talk a little bit more about is this, the stories that we tell of past generations and the feats of accomplishment and, what we try to strive and particularly in a contemporary um, times that it's almost like it's unattainable. Those feats of musicianship and knowledge, the depth of knowledge that was there are almost beyond our reach, but we're encouraged to imagine that or to embrace that, knowing that we'll never ever get there, and that's sort of that tension that So, how do you think that plays out? That those past anecdotes, those stories of that type of degree of accomplishment in the minds of students now who are really sincere in trying to find a place and find their own voice in Hindustani music.
Right. So, Adrian, I think there's always been an element of hyperbole in the narration of anecdotes.
Yes.
And with each successive generation, uh, that is even more exaggerated. And so you have this huge mythification of things, that, you know, practice for 24 hours and stuff like that, And I think we have to, I mean, myths are important because they suggest or they refer to uh, things that were happening at that point. Uh, as long as you get the core idea that, for instance, if somebody is saying, oh, he practiced for 16 hours a day, he may have, he may have. It's not necessary that you have to, but the idea is of having a concentrated kind of practice session, doing it diligently, doing it consistently, and in an organized manner. So if you take those as the core ideas and work your way through, then you're not shouldering all this responsibility of previous generations. So that's just one aspect. I mean, practice regimen, for instance, or duels with tabla players. Like it was almost like some battle between the instrumentalist or vocalist and the tabla player. And so, I mean, if you take the core idea as something of a kind of a playfulness in the conversation, or the fact that actually there has to be a conversation between the two.
Yes, exactly.
There has to be a samvad between the two, and not see yourself in this straight-jacketed kind of thing, and I do my thing, and okay, now over to you, and you do your thing, and then back to me. So it's not a very black and white call and response dialogue between the soloist and the instrumentalist.
Mhm.
And so within that, you can have some sort of tension and relief.
Mhm.
If you take that as a core idea, it helps you to go ahead. But if you stick on to the fact that, oh, he beat him at this, and he posed this challenge to him,
Yeah.
and you go on to regurgitate that and then inform your students, oh, this is what happened. So that can be a downer.
It can. I guess, that also speaks to the fact that there was tensions on a social level, either caste-based or community-based
Absolutely,
between
absolutely.
soloists and accompanists, which has, disappeared, in some ways, but it still can be there. And I know you probably had some anecdotes I've heard over the years about
Yes.
these sorts of things. And I've heard stories from my Guruji about tickets being purchased for tabla players on the train, and then the soloist cashes it in and puts them in third class instead of first class, and these
Yeah,
sorts
yeah, yeah.
these sorts of things.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so those underlining tensions, they must also be part of this.
Absolutely. In fact,
Unity.
Adrian, I share a wonderful relation with my students. So I get to I wouldn't have been able to speak about all these things with my guru, for
Mhm,
instance.
mhm,
But with my students, I ask them, what's the scene like today,
mhm,
and just to suss out whether things have really changed.
mhm,
So even the equation between the soloist and the accompanist,
mhm,
I try to find out both in terms of on-stage relation, off-stage.
mhm,
What does it mean in real terms when it comes to the money involved,
mhm,
the publicity involved, the credit that is given,
mhm,
the recordings that take place of concerts, and post-concert dissemination of that recording,
mhm,
and the permissions involved in that.
mhm,
So all these things I continue to discuss with them, and those are the things which have informed me while writing this book as well. Because if I didn't have that kind of sounding board, I wouldn't really be able to address issues that the next generation is facing
mhm,
in terms of whether it's patronage from institutions or organizations like music circles,
mhm,
whether there is a need to review teaching systems. What's the situation for, let's say, institutionalized music education in universities or music schools? What's the situation with research and archiving and documentation?
yeah.
uh, is there any kind of peer-reviewed writing happening today? It doesn't have to happen in English. It can happen in any language. But
Mhm,
does it really happen? Does it meet international standards?
mhm,
So all these kinds of things I've written about and discussed, and mm, I think I find it really informative for me to when I dialogue with my students about all these.
totally, totally. And having that historical overview too must be fantastic for your students. But I was thinking, just bringing back to tabla players, and you know, it- maybe it was just over a generation ago. Then sometimes the tabla player's name wasn't even mentioned.
Yes.
And as you say, it was just seen as they were the support for the main act. But that's, as you say, has changed tremendously now, and maybe that's because the social uh, formation of, or the social background of tabla players has changed from the early 20th century too, and the position in society. What sorts of things have contributed in the past to tabla players being, you know, almost invisible to now being celebrated, in such rightful and wonderful ways too.
Hmm. So I have to say that some of that still continues. The companies' names are not always given. Uh, I mean, even in my case,
Yeah, yeah,
even today,
yeah.
you have to actually tell people
Uh-huh.
that, the main artist has to, for instance, if let's say Sudhir and I, when we accompany
Yeah.
Shubha,
Mm,
Shubha has to actually bring it to the notice of the organizer.
mm,
Please,
mm,
put in, that's part of a contract. Can you imagine that? I mean, that would be common courtesy, right? That
totally.
you just put in all the names, but uh, etiquette is not easy to come by, I guess. So, um, so that's a problem.
It also works the
But
other one. I know that in Kolkata there was a program organized by Nan Bazar Patrika in which Tajendra Narayan Mazumdar was playing, but with Zakir Hussain. But so they mentioned Zakir Hussain, but forgot
yeah.
to mention Tajendra Narayan. So sometimes it can happen the other way.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And no, but what was it that you were asking me? Ah, the social background.
Yeah,
I think actually, Adrian, the West has played a huge role in this change.
right.
I think I don't know in real terms how it must have happened, but they must have been wondering, that there are two people on the stage,
Yeah.
and if this guy is doing something,
Mm,
surely his name should be there on the poster or the record. So you have Ravi Shankar accompanied by Ustad Allah Rakha, and or whether it's Pandit Kishan Maharaj or whatever. So it was changing at that time. Ustad Ali Akbar Khasa with Mahapurush Mishra,
mm,
um, and then of course Swapan Chowdhury, etc., etc. So I think that has come back to India. So many things in India change when they come from elsewhere,
mm,
you know, and of course, yes, the social background has changed, but it is not always necessary that it plays out similarly in the. I mean, I can tell you that I had this crazy experience when an instrumentalist, the organizer, um, picked me up to take me to the concert hall,
mm.
and picked up the soloist as well. And the soloist said, when he came to the car, he said that I don't travel in the same car as my accompanist.
Mm.
Can you believe it? Uh, so I said, I just whispered, and I was much younger at that time. This was in 1986 or something like that.
Mm.
But it was already a changed world,
Yeah.
At least for me, it was. Obviously, it wasn't for many other people.
Mm,
So I just whispered to the organizer
mm,
that, listen, I'll just take a cab.
mm.
So he said, no, if anybody has to go, it will be him. That was great, but many organizers would not take such a stand.
And
And
especially,
so we went together, to the concert. But so these are, I mean, in retrospect, they're amusing things, that
so and
I mean, you can cry about it,
yeah,
but but I prefer to see it as some amusing kind of.
sure. And I know who that was and how famous they were.
Yeah.
But look, I was just going to invite Anindo Banerjee in,
Yes, yes.
because I know he's got to take off soon, and I was wondering if you had anything to contribute so far, Anindo. Are you
He must be on mute, I think.
okay?
He's on mute. Yeah,
He's
yeah.
on mute. Mm, there we go.
Yeah, sorry. I can't hear you, Adrian, once again.
I was. I know that you have to take off fairly soon, and I was going to ask you if you had anything to contribute, any questions for Anish or anything that comments on what's been covered so far from your perspective too.
No, I'm actually, I'm listening very carefully. Maybe I'll be here for some time now. Later on, I'll ask him. Okay, but
Okay. Okay.
okay, let him
Thank you.
continue. Let him continue.
Thank you.
Sure. So,
Do you want to, at this point, do you want to take some questions, Adrian? I just,
what I'd like to do is maybe
okay.
invite people to put any questions they have in the chat,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
we can put them to you. So we've
Just so we know that everybody is awake and, you know.
Exactly. 'Cause at the end, what I really want to do, and there's some questions coming in now, which I'm going to put there, is I want to turn to this controversial issue of AI and Hindustani music. I want to finish on this as a forward-looking thing to see.
Sure.
But let's take some
Sure.
questions in between. So from
We
Andrew,
have a lot of artificial intelligence, actually, Adrian. Yeah.
and non-artificial stupidity too. Okay. So from Andrew,
Good question.
Andrew,
Reese, I think, has a
I'm
question.
very interested in your comment about the main musicians, in quotes, that didn't want to get into the car with you. I mean, that was quite extraordinary, really. Now, my question is, what happened during the concert? Did it affect your performance, and how did it affect the performance?
It didn't actually, because when the music starts, you stop thinking about all these. Yeah. But I think at a subconscious level, it really remains with you. I mean, the fact that I still remember that instance tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Because it was an experience which was just otherworldly for me, you know, in a negative sense. Because first of all, I don't come from a family of musicians. So I'm not brought up in this whole protocol. And of course, when like I said, I started learning at the age of 6, and I was virtually at my guru's place every day. So I knew how musicians interact with each other, and there was that process of enculturation. But at the same time, when it happens to you, you're taken by surprise, you know.
Totally.
Thanks.
So Andrew Alter has posted a question, and we've got 3 questions up there, so I'll go through them. Andrew's asked, music circles are a thing you mentioned from Mumbai's past. Are those circles still existing in a new form today, or are the current social networks amongst musicians in Mumbai organized in different ways, say, without music circles per se?
So the music circles actually started possibly in the 1920s. What preceded those were actually music clubs. And the music clubs, in fact, had a dual kind of existence. One was, of course, for music performance, but also music teaching. And they kind of predate music schools like the Gandharva Mahavidyalaya or the Bhatkande University, etc., etc. So, I mean, the earliest music club, formal music club in Bombay, was started by the Parsis. It was called the Parsi Gayan Uttejak Mandali. And in fact, Bhatkande also studied as a student there. Yeah. So, and they were all subscription based. There was a membership. And so that the idea of a membership continued through to the music circle as well. But the music circle had only a single reason for its existence. That was to have music concerts. And those concerts were of professional musicians. The music clubs, on the other hand, also encouraged amateurs to perform. So in the case of the music circles, some of them had maybe one day in the year for programs done by their members. But in general, they were for the members to listen to great performers, vocalists, instrumentalists, etc. And the general audience capacity was, because the venues were small, general audience capacity was maybe 50 to 100 to 150, depending on which venue. This was pre-amplification time. And this continued in the 1940s. Then you have, after that, you have amplification. So you have slightly larger venues, but more often than not, this is the capacity. And this is the kind of listenership you have. There's a cross section of listeners across classes and castes, across gender too. So in a sense, it democratizes the listening of music, which was earlier, only in the homes of, let's say, wealthy patrons, and previously it was the Rajas, Maharajas, Nawabs, etc. So the listening experience is democratized. It becomes a more community kind of based listening experience. Today, there are a few music circles, but they are really struggling to stay alive, because the main sustenance comes from the subscription model. They try to garner more funds through sponsors, but the sponsors really feel that 150 is hardly what they call in marketing terms footfalls in a venue, footfalls or eyeballs. So that's not enough for a sponsor to put down money through the year. So you don't really have that kind of sponsorship. But yes, some music circles do exist. Very few, very few.
So you were talking about then, there's a change in performance practice. If the music circles are diminishing in their impact, at the same time, there's huge performances in stadiums and with Hindustani and with large fees and big festivals taking place. And so the performance practice, performing for a music circle in an intimate environment and performing in a huge stadium, what sorts of things run through your mind, and how do you negotiate? Do you play differently? Do you find that people play differently, approach it differently?
So in a music circle, typically, the entire evening was to one artist. At best, to two artists. And it would be for 3 to 4 hours. Beginning at, let's say, 5:30 in the evening, and going on till 9:30, like that, with a break in between. And before that, let's say Ustad Fayyaz Khan Sahab would start at the Bombay Music Circle at, let's say, 9:30 at night, and would end at 4 a.m.
Wow.
Yeah. So his concerts and Kesar Bhai Kerkar's concert would have 2 intermissions. Can you imagine the sheer stamina? Forget about repertoire and the plurality of forms, etc., compositions. But those were the charismatic kind of very iconic figures. But even otherwise, people had an entire evening to themselves. When I started performing also, that was very much the case, but not until 4 a.m., of course. But later, then you had maybe 2 artists, 3 artists in a single evening. I think some of it was to do with the fact that, maybe having 3 artists could get more audiences to the venue. I suspect that is also the case when it comes to large auditoria and stadium kind of situation. So, but as a result, you have barely 45 minutes to an hour for your performance. I mean, out of which maybe 10 minutes at least will go in tuning your instrument, because most of the auditoria are not built expressly for music performances. So just the practical aspect of having a different kind of temperature and lighting in the green room to what is there on stage, it just messes up everything. And so it's just very trying for everyone. And I'm sure for audiences as well. But then now you have such a large audience in this situation, 15,000 people, 10,000 people. So each one comes with his or her own kind of set of expectations and listening experience as well. So, and obviously, if you're a sensitive musician, you're not going to be able to pander to all tastes. So you'll just do your bit, and that's it. There are others who manage to do whatever they do, and of course, then there are geniuses who really deliver great music, and yet get to this, hearts of every person there. So there are all kinds of listeners and there are all kinds of musicians. So it just depends on how you wish to navigate through this.
So, as a follow-up question from Kate is that it's interesting to me that everyone is still talking about classical performance in terms of a soloist and accompanist, rather than in terms of an equal partnership. Do you think that's something that's changed in your lifetime as well, or is it still very much there, or it's in a transition between this soloist, accompanist, and equal partners?
Yeah. Hi, Kate. Really speaking, we have to look at it from two aspects. One is the musical. So definitely, it is about a soloist and an accompanist, because whether it's the choice of, let's say, the choice of key, the choice of rag, the choice of composition, everything that is determined by the soloist, because that's the nature of the music. When I'm, let's say, I play tabla solo, I decide what the tal that I choose to present. I decide what is going to be the duration. I decide what compositions I'm going to play. So I have no quarrel with that. But it's the equation other than the musical one, which can be problematic. So when it results in, let's say, a tussle on stage about recognition or acknowledgement, or if one feels threatened just because the audience has clapped for the audience for the accompanist, then that's really limiting that relation, actually. And then similarly, when it's pre-program or post-program, or the money is discussed, If it's an international tour, then that has its own set of problems. All these things put together, I think you have to look at it differently. Like I said, I don't have any problem with the musical aspect being, that of a soloist and an accompanist. But there has to be an equality when it comes to the off stage.
Totally. Because I think, when tabla players sitting through the alap, I'm thinking this is, the contribution is different as musically as you say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example, Adrian. Nearer Australia, I was in Auckland, and one of the organizers there told me that that a senior instrumentalist was visiting Auckland, and that person had it was Jugalbandi, so two instrumentalists, and they had two accompanists. And so the radio station said that we would like to interview the accompanist, because they'd already done an interview with the soloist, the instrumentalist. So they said, how dare they do that? How can they interview accompanists? That was it. That was it.
Wow. And did you do it?
No, I wasn't part of it, fortunately.
Okay.
By then, Adrian, I would have chucked up the whole concert too.
Fair enough. I think I've got some other questions on the chat, but I think we'll just switch over. Someone's got their hand up. Pavitra, you've got.
Pavitra.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Namaste. It's lovely to listen to you both. Thank you.
Shubha student.
Welcome.
I had a question. I wasn't sure I could articulate it very well on chat, so I raised my hand. May I ask it now?
Please do, yes.
Okay, so I wanted to ask Aneesh, in your experience in the Guru Shishya Parampara as a student, have you ever, had an experience with your guru, especially when not in the nascent stages, but when the guru feels that the student can perform in some place or try and, take up the classical music professionally in terms of performance, and the student also expressed interest in the same. Was there any conversation around how to navigate the professional angles or the aspects of the classical musical industry per se, or the performance practice? I ask also particularly because you're a first generation musician, right? So perhaps you were not as acquainted to the back end practices, what's a minimum fee, or I don't even know if fee was a consideration, but what are some practices to keep in mind? What are things you should be mindful of so as to not fall into, a wrongful practice or feel, or be, how do I say, or fall into the wrong hands, so to speak, or learn the hard way? Or were there any conversations like that with your guru when they also felt the time was right?
Fantastic question, Pavitra. Thanks for that. So in my case, I can tell you my experience. The business of making music was never really discussed. When there's a discussion, both sides speak, right? That's why I'm saying that was never discussed. Okay, but he would suggest a few things, or he would instruct me to go in a particular direction. Okay. So I'll tell you, but before that, I'll say that because I was learning in the older Guru Shishya Parampara, of course, I was not staying at his home, but like I said, I was visiting him every day. whether there was talim or no talim. I was going every day in the hope that there would be talim. Okay. But if there was no talim, it was you just observed. And I was very fortunate. He let me sit in on his practice sessions. It was a great learning experience for me. So so I was always, fly on the wall, fortunately, which was not swatted. But yeah, but I remember distinctly that when I started performing, let's say in 85, 86, and he was on a concert tour overseas. And when he came back and he got to know that I had this performance, and he said, good, it's good. You're ready to go now. You don't have to ask me, because that was the established practice, that you had to seek permission from your guru. And there was a logic to that. Today, for the entitled student, that logic may not be appealing. But the logic was that when you're learning from your guru is actually like a judge, actually, whether in fact you're ready for the concert space. Also, because the guru was concerned about his or her own reputation. Because when you go out there, the first line in your biodata says you are so-and-so student. Okay? So if you make a mess there, the guru is equally hauled up for that. So that was generally the logic. Of course, that can lead to an exploitative tendency as well, where the guru tries to keep you subservient, subordinate, and not allow you. So there are those instances. I don't deny that, but the original logic must have been this. And so I would like to, for instance, my students also, they discuss with me, that so I've got this offer, what should I do, or whatever, So, and then, but some of them I've already told them, like my guru told me, that just go ahead, accept. So I know that they are ready, and I've told them that you don't need to ask me, just go ahead, So so that's the first thing. But the next thing was, even when I started performing, my guru would ask me on and off, how much do you get nowadays for a concert, And I would very hesitatingly tell him, at that time, Pavitra, I can tell you, I have played for 100 rupees, 200 rupees for a concert, So one of my early concerts were 21 rupees or something, out of which 11 rupees went for rickshaw fare to take the tabla. So all this, but it's not a big deal, everybody has done that. I mean, I can glorify this thing, and that will become another myth. But it isn't actually, because everybody goes through all these things, So, so yeah, my guru would ask me that, and he would sometimes say, "Hey, ask for more. Don't do that," So, and I would also say, "Yeah, I'll do that." But obviously, I couldn't get myself to doing that, particularly if it was a senior musician I was accompanying. So you just accepted what you were given. And typically in those days, and I don't think much has changed now, first of all, there were no contracts, even with the main art. And even to this day, I think, at least for domestic concerts, I don't think there are any real contracts, like a contract should be, okay, with all the clauses written out. At best, there'll be an email exchange or whatever. But in the days that I've started performing, the main artist would call you and say, what are you doing on so and so date? Okay, keep it free. Keep it free, you know, like keep your life free on that day. He's not going to tell you where, what, nothing. Just keep it free. So that's it. So when that is the kind of equation, Kate, then you cannot really ask him or her, excuse me, how much money are you going to give me? Let alone telling him or her, this is my fee. There was no question of having a fee. And at the end of the concert, you were like wondering, what's he going to give me in that envelope? You know? And it used to be so crazy. You know, I'm telling you, that 100 rupees, 200, for the longest time, it used to be 300 rupees. 300 rupees. And that was like, wow, that was a windfall for me. So, yeah, so my guru never really talked about these things. I mean, he just taught me the music, you know. You deal with your life otherwise, you know. But I don't know what my students will tell you, but I would like to believe that I try to inform them about some of my experiences, some of the experiences of previous generations, and also what perhaps they could, you know, face today. I mean, the reason for writing those books is also to put it out there for younger musicians to read and to reflect upon.
Thank you so much. I do have a follow-up question, but maybe I'll pause if someone else has.
Sure. I have one more which would fit into this, and then maybe we can come back to you, Pavitra. Look, I'm going to combine two questions that are there. One's from Bobby and one's from Vignesh. And they asked a fairly similar question. With the advent of technology and, say, social media and everything going online, how do you see the Guru Shishya Parampara going forward, especially with respect to the Sina Basina Talim?
So, yeah, when we are talking about the Guru Shishya Parampara, Adrian, I think we're looking at two aspects.
Yep.
One is the relation itself.
Yeah.
And the second is the medium of instruction and the instruction itself. There are two aspects to it. So the relation, I think, can continue. I mean, I have not met you for so many years, right, Adrian? But our relation remains the constant.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are on Zoom, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we don't have a relationship, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Similarly, for the Guru Shishya Parampara, that relation can be marred even if you're meeting the Guru every day of your life. You get what I'm saying?
Totally.
So if there is no empathy in that relationship, even if you meet the Guru, you're staying with the Guru 24 hours, it is meaningless. And if there is empathy, you don't meet the person, you don't meet the Guru in person. Still, there is that bond.
Yeah.
So that is one aspect. But I am concerned about the teaching practice. So, for instance, when you're doing it over the net, you know, practical problems, you know, earlier, the Guru did not necessarily articulate everything. You know, he or she didn't spell out each and every step. You observed, and very often you played in unison. So that is not possible on Zoom or whatever, there's always that lag,
Mhm.
3-second lag or whatever.
Mm.
So that is one tricky area. Second is that the tonal quality, the best microphone and everything, but how are you going to tell whether the resonance is right? How are you going to tell whether the pressure of the buyer is good enough? So that's an area too. But we're living in changing times. I'm not saying no to technology.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all gone through that. I mean, the way music has been disseminated in the entire 20th century
Yeah.
has changed so drastically. And we are all accepted that. We developed adaptive, strategies or whatever. So I think we'll have to do it similarly. Maybe we'll have to do it at multiple levels. For instance, for a long time, I was teaching, for instance, Venkat in Australia. I used to teach him on the net, but I used to couple that with detailed emails. That because I had to also think, okay, he might make a fault here. So then I had to spell it out. I mean, it was a good education it was a learning curve for me because I learned how to articulate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and do you think also there's some myth making in the whole relationship of the Guru Shishya Parampara? I'm referred to a study there of over 3 generations. I must admit to being the author of the study, but I was looking at 3 generations.
I read that, yes.
Of tabla players and looking at, that shift from hereditary musicians, particularly, from what was called at that time Marasi, but we know much more concrete names of the communities. And then, with high caste Hindus learning, and then so the exchange, the Guru Shishya was basically you'd buy compositions. And and the whole thing of how that was started, you would enter into the house,
yes,
come through the back door, the front door, so that relationship was such. And then in the next generation, when the caste was more equality within the caste, then it changed, and then other things came into the imaginaries came into that relationship. And then when it came into the 90s, then it became more of a franchise rather than a gharana, so the relationship changed. But and then now we've got with social media and with technology, it's negotiating. But there's this sort of sense that there's this immutable, unchangeable Guru Shishya Parampara, and of course there are aspects of that, and you can't deny that. But it's at the same time the reality and the narrative of this particular institution. Sometimes there's a lot of distance or tension between the reality and the imagination.
Oh, absolutely. I think Adrian, a large part of that, the problem lies with the fact that we see everything as a monolithic entity within the Hindustani music framework. If it's let's say you're talking about Hindu musicians or Muslim musicians, so all Muslim musicians are like a monolithic entity. It's not so,
Totally.
It's, and similarly with Hindu musicians, and that's only the communal aspect I'm saying, So so one is that, and I think secondly, I feel that hereditary musicians today face a problem when it comes to, not all of them, but many of them face a problem when it comes to looking at Skype, Zoom, etc. Whereas many of us being, let me just get my charger. 1 minute, sorry.
See you in Indo.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So I think taking to internet technology, etc., for us is easier to come by.
Mm. Mm.
Whereas that is not the case with many hereditary. And can you imagine, we're just talking about Hindustani music now, classical music.
Mm.
What about folk musicians?
Yeah.
Yeah. So other practitioners of other traditional music,
Mm.
there's a host of problems there.
Totally. And also, I think one of the things that's coming out more is that Hindustani music wasn't just in the courts. That was in
Yeah.
the Vaishnav Sampradaya
Yes,
played a
exactly.
huge role in
Yes.
the way the migration of music across the country. And I know in Bengal that through the Sankirtan, there's
Yes.
connections with Mathura right back to the 17th century, and this sort of,
Yes.
so just
Yeah.
out even the
But
myth. Mm.
yeah, but even you're talking about the Guru Shishya Parampara.
Mm.
That has also uh, the instruction part
Mm.
has changed a great deal.
Mm.
So that also has not been a never changing continuum.
Mm.
So for instance, I mentioned that people like Vilayat Hussain Khasab, etc. They were taking a tuition fee,
Mm.
which was unheard of until then, right?
Mm.
I mean, you were patronized by Rajas, Maharajas, etc., and you had your retinue of disciples
Yeah.
who lived with you
Yeah.
and served you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but there was no idea of a fee.
Mm-hmm.
But now you are going to the student's home
Mm.
in this city,
Mm.
modern city, and you were doing an hourly based tuition.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a completely different situation, very different context.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we have to take into account the fact that many of the ustads and pandits were already taking to the printed word as well.
Yes.
They were writing about music, they were publishing, and those things are available today.
Mm.
And they were not only writing in Sanskrit, they were writing in Persian, they were writing in regional languages, Marathi, Gujarati, Bangla, and all that material is there for us to look at and see how the trajectory has developed
Mm-hmm.
within the Guru Shishya Parampara.
Yes, exactly. And when you think about with the hereditary before, it was something that you're born into as an occupational specialization, that you were born into. And at that time, your patrons were fewer, like than the musicians. The musicians were
Right.
more, and then with the
Uh,
modernity and the ticketed performance, then the patrons become more than the performers, in the sense that being a purchaser of a ticket, you become the patronage, and and that goes into a question that Raj Tembe has posed: is that has that changed? That the dynamics, it's changed it from a form of hereditary occupational specialization to something of more of fulfilling a exchange, a social contract with your patron in the past, to something where this notion of entertainment and consumption has come into the equation, the performance equation, because of people feel they've purchased a ticket. So I can say what
hmm.
I can.
Well, I'm not too sure whether that didn't exist in the past as well. The aspect of entertainment, because you had that Jajmani model
Yeah,
then,
the servant.
and so you were at the beck and call of the Raja Maharaja,
Mm-hmm.
and so you were playing for marriages, you were playing for birth ceremonies or whatever. So
Putting people to sleep.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you were an employee
Mhm.
basically.
Yeah.
Okay, you got maybe you got land, you got things in kind and cash,
Mhm.
which is different today.
Mm.
You don't get it in kind and you don't get cash.
Mhm.
But so,
Mm.
uh, but yeah, you're very much an employee then. In fact, today you are not an employee.
Mm.
So in that sense, you're free.
Mm.
But finally, it depends on each musician whether he or she wants to come across as a supplicant.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Today, you are in a position. I mean, today I can reject a concert, right?
Mm. Mm.
If there a concert opportunity comes my way,
Mm.
I can say no, I don't want it.
Mm.
But when you are with a Nawab or something,
Mm.
you couldn't say that no, hello,
Mm.
I'm going to sleep in today. Okay,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
you couldn't say that.
Yeah. That's true. But I guess the language of the exchange has changed in the sense that this the language of marketing and business, which is in the title, has changed, and so things have morphed into a different type of exchange, and how you express yourself and your relationship with the patron has changed because of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, you asked me about my personal experience.
Mm.
I can't tell you what a battle it was for me to come to terms to actually have a brochure,
Mm-hmm.
of myself, to
Mm.
have my bio data printed out.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I went through the steps. First, I would type out my, you know,
Mm-hmm.
pre-computer days. So I used to type out my bio data,
Mm.
and it was a very clinical kind of thing.
Mm.
And then that transformed itself to this printed biodata with a photograph because they needed a photograph. Earlier, we used to send a hard copy.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was this photograph in the brochure itself.
Mm.
But I used to literally cringe, Adrian.
Mm.
I was very self-conscious about what I was saying in that. So it had to be very clinical. And then finally, I asked a friend, hey, listen, can you just write this out for me?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't really express myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the actual brochure came into existence for me. But today things have changed vastly. You have your own website, and I do mine too. And because uh, you need to negotiate with changing times. It's not possible for you to live in the 19th century and want to work in the 21st century. So certain things you need to change. Now, how much you want to change
Yeah.
is, of course, it's up to you.
It's
And yeah,
which I think I know we're running close to the end. We've got maybe 5 minutes. If
sure.
so, it just brings us to this wonderful point, with change, and we are on the cusp of something quite revolutionary with AI. Just like with the Industrial Revolution, the invention of machines and mass production radically changed everything. And people, culture, music changed everything like that. So I was wondering if you can share any ideas or thoughts about where you see AI intersecting with Hindustani music, and what that might hold for future generations involved with Hindustani music. It's a big question, I know. So just feel free to
Yeah,
take any part of it. Yeah.
sure. So I must confess that I'm not a very tech savvy person.
Mm.
And my guru in this aspect is Shubha.
Mm.
So So she informs me about whatever has to happen. And so she would be the good person to answer that. But I've been at a couple of seminars which have dealt with AI actually in music, at IIT and in Bangalore too. And I've been observing things that are happening, let's say, particularly with tabla and tabla accompaniment, having the not just the tals being played, but even very basic phrases within the tal cycle, which can respond to vocal music. So I think the Rana Days, I think, have produced that. They've developed that app, and so yeah, it's exciting, but as long as it doesn't displace the live element, I mean, it's good as a practice tool, I think. I'll tell you a very funny thing. In the early days when you had these tal malas, on and off kind of thing. Yeah, you had a tabla player at your beck and call. So I was engaged for this concert with a vocalist, and she decided to sing a composition in Ada Chautal, which is a tal of 14 matras, and it's not too many khayaliyas sing khayal in Ada Chautal, Vilambit Ada Chautal. So she chose that, and we were in the green room, and we started practicing, and then she looked a little bewildered, So I said, "What happened? Am I playing something wrong? Is the tempo not right? What is the problem? Please let me know." She said, "No, you are playing properly, but it is not the tal which is played on my tal mala. I got used to that one because the place where I live in, there aren't too many tabla players who play this tal. So I have lost the practice with a live tabla player." I said, "Okay, now I have not heard that tal mala interpretation. Otherwise, I would have tried that." But this was very much an experience that I had. So there can be adverse effects also.
Absolutely.
So
I've been sort of doing some work with Sanjoy in Bandupad, Kolkata on this, and taken it to quite an extent. First thing we realized we're just on the cusp of some huge thing, because what we've got now is a very rudimentary, but the capacity to come in and basically replicate different feels, analyze recordings of rags in the from the past, to suggest ways of accompanying for aspiring tabla players, because as a fantastic accompanist yourself, I think all credit to you, because I think you've educated yourself so much on how to accompany, rather than having a separate sort of as a separate subject. But with AI and stuff now, there's a capacity for that to become part of the pedagogic approach to learning music as well, and you can see extrapolating over 30-40 years where we can possibly go. It's sort of mind-boggling in a sense, would you say?
Absolutely. I think actually with regard to tabla and accompaniment, you might want to look at the work done by Martin Clayton too. He's been working with tabla with khayal, and so interesting work. And but once again, when you're analyzing what is happening in a concert
Mm.
with a tabla player,
Mm.
you can't, map it out like a graph of matras,
Mhm.
And kind of say, okay, he's played 2 strokes here and 3 strokes here and 5 here. And okay, you might even define the language that is used, terikite, tete, etc., etc. But how are you going to talk about the resonance, the quality of the tone? One tin in the theka may be different from another tin, the same bowl in the theka. And there I'm actually responding to something. I mean, if I'm a sensitive tabla player, I would be responding differently depending on the melodic movement.
Yeah, totally.
Or the use of the song text. So in the case of vocal music, and similarly for instrumental music. So like I said, that there are various possibilities.
Yeah.
And if it can be used in conjunction with conventional teaching, that would be great, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think all these things are raising many questions, and through spectrograms and machine learning and artificial neurological networks, these things can be taken into account. But it's like, I guess, as you say, that cautionary tale is, it depends on who's using it for what purpose.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
That's the $64 million.
Yeah. So Adrian, that could also be, lead to a sense of entitlement if you have a student at a very early stage, grabbing these tools and then saying, okay, I can do it, and whereas you can't actually do it. So if there is a guided use of these tools, it would be great.
Yeah.
And for that, of course, the guru or the teacher has to teach himself or herself how to use those.
Absolutely. And
for the moment, I cannot see myself doing that.
No, but it's your students. You've set them up well. You've given.
But I learn from them.
Yeah. And I'm sure they learned so much from you too. So we've got the last. The COVID's asked a very super important question to end up.
Yes.
The thing is, when are you coming to Australia again?
Yeah. Coming in August.
Yes, this August. Yes.
Yes.
But to Sydney, not to Melbourne.
Sydney, yes. So the cakes will have to wait for a while.
Well, we've told everyone in Sydney there's no cakes, so you have to come to Melbourne.
The cakes and the meat pies.
Meat pie.
But you're in Sydney.
Yeah. Yes.
In Sydney, yes.
Sydney, yeah. Please get in touch.
All right. All right.
So I think we'll wrap up today's session, and by thanking Aneesh so much for sharing his valuable time and experience with us. And I think this is, the perfect sort of thing that the collective, or aim of the collective, is to have people like Aneesh share their knowledge with us. And I encourage you, to, if you feel up to it, we're a non-profit organization. We have free membership. So please just join up, and we'll keep you abreast of any other talks. And if you have any suggestions about what we can do, or you want to get in contact with people from other parts of Australia or elsewhere, then please just join up, and we'll build a little community online.
Thanks so much, Adrian, for having me as part of this discussion. Really stimulating discussion. Thank you for those questions, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aneesh ji. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.